The rain came down in sheets, a relentless Seattle drizzle that painted the windows of Starlight Brew with rivulets of silver, turning the upscale coffee shop into a glowing cocoon against the early October night. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of freshly ground espresso beans and the soft hum of conversations from tech entrepreneurs, artists, and the occasional tourist seeking refuge from the wet. Emily Harper, 36, moved behind the counter with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent the last 2 years perfecting the art of invisibility. Her black apron was tied neatly around her slim frame, her dark hair pulled back in a low bun, strands escaping just enough to soften the sharp edges of her exhaustion. She adjusted the apron for the third time that evening, not out of vanity but from a nervous habit born of carrying secrets too heavy for her slight shoulders. Once she'd been a rising star in Seattle's tech scene, a software engineer with a knack for artificial intelligence algorithms that could predict market trends with uncanny accuracy. Now she was just another barista pouring lattes for the city's elite while trying to forget the life that had been stolen from her. The counter was her stage, the espresso machine her prop, and the smile she wore was her costume, hiding the woman who'd once dreamed of changing the world. Emily Table 6 needs a refill on their cold brew, and the guy at 8 keeps complaining about the Wi-Fi called Mia, the head barista, her voice sharp over the clatter of cups and the hiss of steam. Mia barely looked up from the tablet where she tracked orders, her efficiency as much a shield as Emily's silence. Emily nodded, grabbing a pitcher of cold brew and weaving through the crowded shop, her steps light but deliberate like a dancer avoiding landmines. The man at table 8, a tech bro in a Patagonia vest, was tapping furiously at his laptop, muttering about unacceptable latency. Emily leaned over, her voice soft but clear. "Sir, try switching to the guest network. The main one gets overloaded this time of night." He glanced up, surprised, as if noticing her for the first time, and followed her advice. Within seconds, his frown eased. "Hey, it worked. You know your stuff." Emily offered a tight smile and moved on before he could ask questions. She didn't need anyone digging into why a barista knew how to troubleshoot network congestion like a seasoned IT professional. That was a door she'd locked long ago, and the key was buried under 2 years of shame and betrayal. The evening rush was in full swing, the shop buzzing with the energy of Seattle's after-work crowd. Emily's hands moved on autopilot, steaming milk, pulling shots, wiping down the counter, each motion a ritual to keep her past at bay. She'd been careful, so careful to avoid anything that might connect her to the woman she'd been, Emily Harper, MIT graduate co-founder of a startup that had promised to revolutionize predictive analytics. That dream had died the day Nathan Brooks, her best friend since college, and the man she'd trusted with her future, betrayed her. Nathan had taken her AI code, the product of sleepless nights and years of expertise, and claimed it as his own, building his company, Apex Innovations, on the foundation of her stolen work. Worse, he'd accused her of falsifying data, a lie so expertly crafted that their colleagues, their investors, even their mutual friends had believed him. By the time Emily realized what was happening, her reputation was in tatters, her savings drained by legal fees and her name erased from the company she'd helped create. She'd fled to the anonymity of Starlight Brew, where no one asked about her past, and the only thing expected of her was a perfect pour. "Emily, focus!" Mia's voice snapped her back to the present. "Table 12's been trying to get your attention for 5 minutes. Emily's gaze flicked to the corner booth, where an elegant older woman sat alone, her silver hair catching the light of the crystal pendant lamps that hung from the ceiling. The woman's hands moved in graceful arcs, signing something with a warm smile that seemed out of place in the frenetic energy of the shop. Emily's heart clenched. She recognized the language instantly, American Sign Language, a skill she'd picked up in college to communicate with a deaf classmate. Without thinking, she set down the rag she'd been using to wipe the counter and approached the table. "Good evening." She signed, her hands steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. "How can I help you?" The woman's face lit up, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Oh, you sign. How wonderful," she responded, her hands moving quickly. "I was hoping to compliment the barista on this latte. The foam is perfect, like something I had in Florence last year." Emily smiled, a genuine one that felt foreign on her lips. "I'll pass that along. Would you like me to ask about the blend? I think we're using a single-origin Ethiopian today." The woman nodded eagerly, launching into a story about her travels in Italy, her hands painting vivid pictures in the air. Emily followed effortlessly, her own signs fluid and precise, the conversation a small oasis of connection in her carefully guarded world. For a moment, she forgot the weight of her secrets, forgot the fear that someone might recognize her, forgot the life she'd lost. Behind her, the shop had grown quieter, the hum of conversation dimming, as a few patrons turned to watch the exchange. Emily was vaguely aware of their stares, but kept her focus on the woman who was now signing about a cafe in Rome where the espresso was served in tiny porcelain cups. "You're very kind to indulge me." The woman signed, her smile softening. "Most people just nod and walk away when they realize I'm deaf." "Where did you learn to sign so beautifully?" Emily hesitated, her fingers pausing mid-air. The question was innocent, but it pierced the armor she'd built around her past. "I studied it in college," she signed, then added quickly, "just a hobby." The lie tasted bitter, but she couldn't afford to let the truth slip. MIT her degree, her life in tech, they were all off-limits, buried beneath the barista persona she'd crafted to survive. The woman tilted her head, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "You must have a gift for languages." "Are you sure it was just a hobby?" Before Emily could respond, a deep voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Excuse me, miss." Emily turned, her spine stiffening instinctively at the commanding tone. Standing closer than she'd expected was Ethan Caldwell, Seattle's most enigmatic tech billionaire, his hazel eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. He was tall, with dark hair that fell just slightly out of place, wearing a tailored blazer that screamed money, but with a casual edge that suggested he didn't care to flaunt it. His presence seemed to shift the air in the room, drawing every eye like a magnet. "My mother's been trying to get a refill for her latte," he said, his voice carrying a hint of impatience, but softened by something else. "Curiosity, maybe." "I'm sorry, sir," Emily said, her voice low and professional, though her heart was racing. "I'll take care of it right away." She reached for the empty cup on the table, but Ethan's hand gestured toward his mother. "She was enjoying your conversation. Don't stop on my account." Emily's gaze flicked back to the woman Margaret Caldwell, she realized, recognizing her from society pages she'd skimmed in better days. Margaret was watching them with a knowing smile, her hands still for the moment. Emily signed quickly. "I'll get that refill now. Anything else you'd like?" Margaret's eyes twinkled. "Another conversation with you, perhaps?" "You're a rare find." Emily forced a smile, her cheeks warming as she turned to head back to the counter. Ethan's voice stopped her again. "You're fluent in sign language," he said, not a question, but a statement, his tone laced with something she couldn't quite place, intrigue, suspicion, or both. "That's unusual for a barista." Emily's pulse quickened, her mind racing for a safe response. "I picked it up a while ago," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "It's useful sometimes." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he could see through her carefully constructed facade. "Useful?" He repeated, his gaze lingering on her hands, which she realized were trembling slightly. "You don't strike me as someone who just picks things up. What's your story?" The question was casual, but it landed like a punch. Emily felt the familiar panic rising, the instinct to run, to deflect, to disappear. She'd spent 2 years avoiding questions like this, crafting a life where no one looked too closely. But Ethan Caldwell wasn't just anyone. He was the kind of man who noticed details, who built empires by seeing what others missed. No story, she said, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. Just a barista who likes to make good coffee. She turned away before he could press further, her heart pounding as she retreated to the safety of the counter. Back at the espresso machine, Emily busied herself with Margaret's refill, her hands moving mechanically while her mind spun. Ethan Caldwell. His name alone carried weight in Seattle, a city where tech titans were as common as rain clouds. He was the CEO of Caldwell Ventures, a venture capital firm that had funded half the startups in the Pacific Northwest. She'd seen him on magazine covers, heard his name whispered in the halls of her old company, but she'd never imagined he'd be standing in her coffee shop, looking at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. Mia appeared beside her, wiping her hands on a towel. "What was that about? You were signing like you're fluent or something." Emily shrugged, focusing on the latte art she was attempting to pour. "Just helping a customer." Mia's eyes narrowed. "That's not just any customer. That's Ethan Caldwell, and he's staring at you like you just hacked his company's mainframe." Emily's hand slipped the latte art, turning into a messy swirl. "He's just here with his mom," she said, but her voice betrayed her unease. Mia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Be careful, Em. Guys like that don't notice people like us unless they want something." Emily nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She could still feel Ethan's eyes on her, even from across the room. When she glanced up, he was seated at the booth with Margaret, but his gaze was fixed on her, thoughtful and unyielding. She turned away quickly, busying herself with another order, but the weight of his attention followed her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of coffee orders and forced smiles, but Emily was hyper-aware of Table 12. Every time she glanced their way, Ethan seemed to be watching her, his expression a mix of curiosity and something deeper, something that made her skin prickle with both fear and an unwelcome spark of intrigue. Margaret, meanwhile, was all warmth, signing quick compliments about the coffee and asking Emily about her favorite blends. Each interaction felt like a test, a gentle probe into the life Emily had worked so hard to hide. When the Caldwells finally prepared to leave, Ethan paused at the counter, sliding a $50 bill across as a tip. For the excellent service, he said, his voice low, almost intimate, "And for the conversation with my mother. She doesn't get that often." Emily's throat tightened. "It was my pleasure," she said, meaning it despite herself. Ethan's smile was small but genuine, transforming his face from intimidating to almost approachable. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily," she said, leaving off her last name, hoping he wouldn't press. "Emily?" he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "I'll be back tomorrow. Maybe you can tell me more about where you learned to sign." It wasn't a question, and the promise in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. As he guided his mother toward the door, Margaret caught Emily's eye and signed, "He likes you." Emily nearly dropped the cup she was holding, her cheeks burning as she forced herself to focus on cleaning the counter. The rest of her shift was a haze, her mind replaying the encounter like a loop of code she couldn't debug. Ethan Caldwell wasn't just a customer. He was a reminder of the world she'd lost, the world she'd been forced to abandon. She'd been so careful, so deliberate in her invisibility, and now one conversation had cracked the foundation of her new life. As she counted her tips at the end of the night, the $50 bill felt like a warning, a sign that Ethan saw more than she wanted him to. "You okay, Em?" Mia asked, appearing beside her as they closed up the shop. "You've been jumpy since Caldwell showed up." Emily forced a smile, shoving the bills into her apron pocket. "Just tired." Mia's expression softened, but there was a flicker of curiosity she didn't hide. That tip wasn't just for the coffee, you know. I've been in this business long enough to spot a guy who's interested." Emily's stomach twisted. "It's not like that," she said, but the words felt hollow. Mia shrugged. "Maybe not. But men like him don't tip $50 unless they're planning to come back. Just watch yourself." "Okay," Emily nodded, but Mia's warning only deepened her unease. Ethan Caldwell wasn't interested in her the way Mia thought. He was interested in her secrets, and that was far more dangerous. The walk to her tiny apartment in Capitol Hill was cold and wet, the rain soaking through her thin jacket. Seattle's streets were alive with neon signs and the hum of late-night traffic, but Emily felt like a ghost moving through it all. Her apartment was a stark contrast to the opulence of Starlight Brew, bare walls, second-hand furniture, a mattress on the floor. But hidden in a lockbox under her bed was the only piece of her old life she'd managed to keep, a hard drive containing her original AI code backups of her work emails proving her contributions to Apex Innovations. She hadn't touched it in 2 years, too afraid of what Nathan might do if he found out she still had it. But tonight, as she sat on the edge of her bed, the memory of Ethan's piercing gaze made her pull out the lockbox. Her hands shook as she opened it, the hard drive gleaming like a relic from a lost civilization. She didn't know why Ethan's attention unnerved her so much, but she felt the walls of her carefully constructed anonymity beginning to crumble. And then her phone buzzed, an unknown number lighting up the screen. "Emily, this is Ethan Caldwell. Got your number from the shop's manager. Hope that's okay. My mother hasn't stopped talking about you. Can we meet tomorrow? Somewhere quiet, just to talk." The message was polite, but it filled Emily with a bone-deep dread. Men like Ethan didn't ask for permission. They took what they wanted. And what he wanted, she feared, was the truth she'd spent 2 years hiding. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button, torn between running again and facing whatever storm was coming. For the first time in years, Emily Harper felt the spark of something she'd thought was gone forever, the faint, dangerous pull of hope. The morning fog clung to Lake Washington's shore, wrapping the trees in a soft gray veil. As Emily Harper stood at the edge of Gasworks Park, her sneakers sinking slightly into the damp grass. Seattle's skyline loomed across the water, a jagged silhouette of glass and steel that felt both familiar and alien, a reminder of the life she'd lost. She'd agreed to meet Ethan Caldwell here, against every instinct screaming at her to run, to disappear into another city, another identity. But something in his voice last night, that mix of curiosity and sincerity, had hooked her, pulling her toward this moment like a fish on a line. She adjusted her worn jacket, the one she'd bought at a thrift store after her bank accounts were frozen, and scanned the park. It was early, barely past 8, and the only other people were joggers and dog walkers, their shapes blurred by the mist. Emily's breath caught as she spotted Ethan approaching, his tall frame cutting through the fog like a beacon. He was dressed casually, dark jeans, a navy sweater, a leather jacket that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But there was nothing casual about the way he moved, purposeful and confident, like a man who owned the ground he walked on. He carried 2 coffee cups, the steam rising in curls, and when he saw her, his hazel eyes lit with a warmth that made her stomach flip inappropriately. "You came," he said, his voice carrying a hint of surprise as he handed her a cup. The logo on it was from a boutique roastery in Fremont, not the cheap diner coffee she was used to. "I wasn't sure you would." Emily wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth against the October chill. "I almost didn't," she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "But you said you wanted to talk about your mother." "I didn't want to be rude." It was a half-truth, and from the slight quirk of Ethan's lips, he knew it. He gestured toward a bench overlooking the lake, and they sat, the damp wood creaking under their weight. The silence between them was heavy, not uncomfortable, but charged, like the air before a storm. Emily sipped her coffee, the rich, nutty flavor a stark contrast to the bitterness of her thoughts. She'd spent the night replaying their encounter at Starlight Brew, dissecting every word, every glance, trying to figure out what Ethan Caldwell wanted from her. Men like him didn't notice baristas unless they had a reason, and Emily's reasons were buried in a past she'd fought to keep hidden. So Ethan began leaning back on the bench, his eyes fixed on the water. "My mother, Margaret. She hasn't stopped talking about you since last night. Says you're the first person in years who didn't treat her like an inconvenience." Emily's chest tightened, a mix of pride and guilt. "She's easy to talk to," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Most people don't take the time to learn sign language, so I guess it meant a lot to her." Ethan turned to look at her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "Where did you learn it? You said college, but that's a pretty specific skill for a hobby." Emily's fingers tightened around her cup, the cardboard denting slightly. She'd rehearsed this answer 100 times, but under Ethan's scrutiny it felt flimsy. "I had a friend at school who was deaf. I picked it up to talk to her. It stuck." She shrugged, hoping the nonchalance would deflect him, but Ethan's eyes narrowed just a fraction, and she knew he wasn't buying it. "You're not just fluent," he said, his voice low, almost probing. "You're precise, like you've studied it formally. And last night, when you helped that guy with his Wi-Fi, you threw out terms like network congestion, like you've spent time in a server room, not a coffee shop." Emily's heart skipped, her mind racing for a way out. She'd been so careful, so deliberate in keeping her past buried. But one slip helping a customer signing with Margaret had unraveled everything. "I'm good with tech," she said, forcing a laugh. "You pick up a lot working in places like Starlight. Customers are always complaining about something." Ethan didn't smile, didn't let her off the hook. "Emily," he said, her name sounding too intimate in his mouth, "you don't strike me as someone who just picks things up. You've got an MIT-level brain hiding behind that apron. What's the real story?" The question hit like a physical blow, cracking open the carefully sealed vault where she kept her past. Emily stared at the lake, the water rippling under the weight of the fog, and for a moment she was back in that conference room 2 years ago, her colleagues' eyes on her as Nathan Brooks stood at the front, his voice smooth and venomous. "Emily's been falsifying data," he'd said, holding up doctored reports that made her look like a thief. "We can't trust her with our future." The memory was a knife, sharp and cold, cutting through her resolve. She'd trusted Nathan, her best friend since their freshman year at MIT, the one who'd stayed up with her coding through the night, who'd promised they'd build something world-changing together. Instead, he'd taken her AI code algorithms she'd spent years perfecting and used it to launch Apex Innovations, erasing her from the company's history while painting her as a fraud. By the time she'd fought back, the damage was done. Her reputation destroyed, her savings gone, her name blacklisted in Seattle's tech scene. She'd run not because she was guilty, but because she had no fight left. Emily, Ethan's voice pulled her back softer, now tinged with concern. She realized her hands were shaking, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her cup. "I'm fine," she said quickly, setting the cup on the bench to hide her trembling. "There's no story. Okay, I worked in tech for a while, got burned out, and now I'm here. That's it." The lie tasted like ash, but it was safer than the truth. Ethan studied her, his hazel eyes searching her face like he could see the cracks in her facade. "Burned out," he repeated, his tone skeptical but not accusing. "You're 26, and you're pouring coffee in a city where half the startups would kill for someone who can troubleshoot a network in 10 seconds flat. That's not burnout. That's running from something." Emily's breath caught her instinct screaming at her to get up, to walk away, to disappear before he dug any deeper. But the way he was looking at her, not with pity, but with a kind of respect she hadn't seen in years, kept her rooted to the bench. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "You don't even know me." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, closing the distance between them. "Because my mother hasn't smiled like she did last night in a long time," he said simply. "Because you didn't just make her coffee, you made her feel seen. And because I've spent my career spotting talent, and you, Emily, are hiding more than you're letting on." His words were a mirror reflecting the woman she'd tried to bury, and for a moment she hated him for it. She didn't want to be seen, didn't want to be noticed. But Ethan Caldwell wasn't the type to let things go. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through it with a frown. "I was going over some documents this morning," he said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "Apex Innovations is pitching a merger with my firm, Caldwell Ventures. They've got this AI system, predictive analytics market, modeling the kind of thing that could disrupt the industry. Sound familiar?" Emily's blood turned to ice. Apex Innovations, Nathan's company. The one built on her stolen code. She forced her face to stay neutral, but her hands clenched into fists in her lap. "Sounds like a lot of tech companies," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned his phone toward her, showing a glossy PDF with Apex's logo splashed across the top. Their lead product is an AI called Sentinel. Claims it can predict market shifts with 92% accuracy. They say it's proprietary, developed in-house by their founder, Nathan Brooks. Emily's vision blurred, the name hitting her like a punch. Nathan, her best friend, her confidant. The man who'd looked her in the eye and promised they'd conquer the world together. She'd written every line of Sentinel's core algorithms, spent countless nights debugging, refining, testing. And Nathan had taken it all, rewriting history to make her disappear. Ethan's voice was gentle now, his eyes narrowing with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She wanted to run, to vanish into the fog, and never look back. But something in Ethan's expression, steady, unwavering, like he was ready to catch her if she fell, kept her there. "I worked with Nathan Brooks," she said finally, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "At a startup a few years ago, things didn't end well." It was the most she'd said about her past in 2 years, and it felt like ripping open a wound. Ethan's eyebrows rose, but he didn't push, just waited, giving her space to decide how much to share. "He was my friend," she continued, her voice cracking. "We built something together, something big. But he took it, claimed it as his own, and made sure no one would believe me if I tried to fight back." The truth hung between them, raw and heavy, and Emily braced herself for skepticism, for dismissal. But Ethan's expression didn't change, except for a slight tightening of his jaw. "What did he take?" he asked, quietly. Emily hesitated, her heart pounding. She'd kept her secrets locked away for so long, but Ethan's steady gaze was like a key turning in a rusty lock. "Code," she said at last. "AI algorithms. The kind that could predict markets, optimize investments. I wrote them. But Nathan, he made sure my name was erased from everything." Ethan leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. "Sentinel," he said, not a question, but a confirmation. "You're telling me you created the tech Apex is trying to sell me?" Emily nodded, her throat tight. "I have proof," she said, almost a whisper. "Backups, emails, development logs. But I've never used them. Nathan, he's not someone you cross. Not without consequences." Ethan set his phone down, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and intense. Emily, I've dealt with people like Nathan Brooks my entire career. They thrive in the shadows, manipulating, lying, thinking they're untouchable. But they're not. If you have proof, we can expose him. Together. Emily's heart raced a mix of fear and something else. Hope, maybe, or the faint stirrings of anger she'd suppressed for too long. You don't know what he's capable of, she said, her voice shaking. He didn't just take my work. He destroyed my life, my reputation, my savings, my ability to work in this industry. If I go after him, he'll come for me again. Ethan's eyes softened, but there was steel beneath them. He won't, he said firmly. Not if you're not alone. I have resources, Emily lawyers, investigators, connections. If what you're saying is true, Nathan Brooks is trying to sell me stolen goods. And I don't do business with thieves. His words were a lifeline, but Emily's fear was a weight pulling her under. She'd trusted once before, and it had cost her everything. Why would you do this? She asked, her voice barely audible over the lapping of the lake. You don't even know me. Ethan's smile was small, almost vulnerable. Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted, he said. And because yesterday you didn't just make my mother's night. You reminded me that there are still people in this world who care about doing the right thing even when it's hard. Let me help you, Emily. Let me fight with you. She stared at him, torn between the urge to bolt and the pull of his conviction. The fog was lifting now, the skyline sharpening across the lake, and Emily felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. She'd spent 2 years running, hiding, letting Nathan control her life even from a distance. But sitting here with Ethan's steady presence beside her, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could fight back. I have a hard drive, she said finally, her voice steadying. It's got everything, my original code timestamps emails, where Nathan asked me to explain the algorithms because he couldn't understand them himself. But it's hidden and I'm not sure I'm ready to dig it up. Ethan nodded, his expression serious but not pushing. You don't have to decide today, he said. But if you're willing, I'd like to see it. Not to pressure you, but to understand what we're up against. Nathan's meeting with my team next week to finalize the merger terms. If he's lying about Sentinel, I need to know before I sign anything. Emily's stomach twisted at the thought of Nathan sitting across from Ethan, spinning his lies, profiting off her work, while she poured coffee for a living. Okay, she said, the word feeling like a leap into the unknown. I'll show you. But Ethan, if Nathan finds out I'm talking to you, he'll come for me. He's done it before. Ethan's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his face. He won't get the chance, he said. I promise you that. As they stood to leave, the fog lifting to reveal the city in all its sharp clarity, Emily felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility of justice. But with it came a bone-deep fear that Nathan Brooks was already watching, waiting for her to make a move. And when he did, she wasn't sure even Ethan Caldwell could protect her from the fallout. The glass tower of Apex Innovations loomed over Seattle's financial district, its sleek facade reflecting the gray October sky like a mirror of ambition and deceit. Emily Harper stood in the elevator, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Ethan Caldwell, standing beside her, could hear it. The numbers climbed, 20 per 26 one, pulling her closer to a confrontation she'd spent 2 years avoiding. She smoothed the front of her borrowed blazer, a Navy number from Ethan's assistant, that fit her better than it had any right to, but it couldn't mask the tremor in her hands or the dread curling in her stomach. Ethan, dressed in a charcoal suit that screamed power, glanced at her, his hazel eyes steady. Breathe, Emily, he said softly, his hand brushing hers in a gesture that was both reassuring and electrifying. "You're not alone in this." She nodded, but the words felt distant, drowned out by the memory of Nathan Brooks's voice, smooth and cutting, as he'd dismantled her life in front of their colleagues. Today, she wasn't just Emily Harper, barista and ghost of her former self. She was Dr. Emily Harper, independent consultant hired by Caldwell Ventures to verify the intellectual property of Apex's flagship AI Sentinel. It was Ethan's plan, bold and reckless walk into Nathan's office, confront him with the truth, and watch him unravel. But Emily knew Nathan better than Ethan did. Nathan didn't unravel. He manipulated, deflected, destroyed. And now, standing in this elevator, she felt like she was walking into a trap she'd never see coming. The doors opened onto the 32nd floor, a pristine expanse of glass and chrome that screamed success. The receptionist, a young woman with a practiced smile, stood as they approached. "Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Harper. Mr. Brooks is expecting you in the main conference room." Emily's stomach twisted at the sound of her old title, one she hadn't used since Nathan had erased her from the industry. Ethan gave the receptionist a curt nod, his hand resting lightly on the small of Emily's back, as they followed her down a hallway lined with framed awards and photos of Nathan shaking hands with tech moguls. Each image was a knife to Emily's chest, a reminder of how thoroughly he'd rewritten their shared history. She'd been in these halls once, a partner in Apex's early days, working late nights with Nathan, dreaming of a future where their AI would change the world. Now her name was nowhere to be found, scrubbed from every document, every patent, every trace of the company she'd helped build. The conference room doors loomed ahead, and Emily's breath caught as they swung open, revealing Nathan Brooks, standing at the head of a long glass table, his smile as polished as the room itself. He was shorter than Ethan, with jet black hair styled to perfection and a suit that screamed bespoke. His dark eyes flicked from Ethan to Emily, and for a split second his smile faltered a crack in his perfect facade. "Marcus, good to see you," he said, extending a hand to Ethan, his voice smooth as silk. "And you must be Dr. Harper." "A pleasure." The lie was so effortless, so practiced, that Emily felt a surge of rage, hot and clean, burning through her fear. He knew exactly who she was, but he was playing the stranger, betting she'd stay silent, stay invisible. "Dr. Harper is consulting on the merger," Ethan said, his tone calm but edged with steel as he shook Nathan's hand. "She's an expert in AI and predictive analytics here to verify the provenance of Sentinel's code." Nathan's eyes flicked back to Emily, and she saw the moment recognition hit a flash of shock, quickly masked by his trademark charm. "Is that so?" he said, his smile widening as he gestured for them to sit. "Well, I'm sure you'll find everything in order. Sentinel is our pride and joy, developed entirely in-house." Emily's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms as she forced herself to stay calm. She wanted to scream, to call him out right then, but Ethan's plan relied on precision, on letting Nathan dig his own grave. She sat across from him, her tablet in front of her, loaded with the evidence she'd spent the last week compiling with Ethan's help, her original code timestamps emails, where Nathan had begged her to explain the algorithms because he couldn't keep up. "I'm sure it's impressive," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm inside her. "But I'd like to start with the development timeline. Sentinel's a complex system. 92% accuracy in market predictions is no small feat. How long did it take to build?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, his confidence unshaken. "About 3 years," he said, his tone casual. "My lead researcher, Dr. Alan Chen, spearheaded the project. Brilliant guy, MIT, PhD, though he's in Tokyo right now overseeing our Asian rollout." The lie was so smooth it almost sounded true. But Emily caught the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers tapped once on the table. He was nervous, and that gave her strength. 3 years, Ethan said, his voice neutral as he opened his own tablet. "That's a significant investment. I'd love to see the development logs, maybe some early prototypes. My team needs to ensure the IP is clean before we move forward." Nathan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes darted to Emily, and she saw the calculation there the moment he realized this wasn't just a routine meeting. "Of course," he said. "I'll have my team compile everything by end of week, but I assure you our documentation is airtight." Emily's heart pounded as she opened her tablet, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and calm, "I have some questions about the code itself. Sentinel's core algorithms rely on a unique neural network architecture, one I've seen before." She turned her tablet toward Nathan, displaying a snippet of code, her code written in her cramped MIT dorm room, refined over years of sleepless nights. "This sequence, for instance, it's highly specific, designed to optimize real-time market data. Can you explain how your team developed it?" Nathan's smile froze, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the screen. "I'm not a coder myself," he said, his tone light, but strained. "That's why I hire the best. Dr. Chen would be better equipped to answer technical questions." Emily leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "Dr. Chen, who's conveniently in Tokyo. Funny, because I wrote this code. Every line of it. And I have the backups to prove it." The room went still, the air thick with tension. Nathan's face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed him, fear, anger, and something darker, something Emily recognized from the day he'd betrayed her. "I'm not sure what you're implying," he said, his voice tight. "Apex owns Sentinel outright. Our patents are filed, our contracts are clear. If you're suggesting otherwise, you'd better have more than accusations." Ethan's hand brushed Emily's under the table, a silent signal to keep going. She swiped to another file, an email from Nathan dated 3 years ago, begging her to debug a section of Sentinel because he couldn't make heads or tails of it. "This email," she said, projecting it onto the conference room screen, "shows you asking me for help with the very code you claim Dr. Chen wrote. And this," she swiped again, showing a time-stamped commit log from her personal server, "proves I was working on Sentinel 6 months before Apex even existed." Nathan's composure cracked, his face paling as he stared at the screen. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "Anyone can forge documents. You could have faked those timestamps, those emails. Ethan, you can't seriously believe this. This barista over me." The word barista was a jab meant to diminish her, but Emily felt a surge of power, her fear burning away in the heat of her anger. "I'm not just a barista," she said, standing now, her voice ringing with a strength she hadn't felt in years. "I'm Dr. Emily Harper, co-founder of Apex Innovations, and you stole my life's work." Before Nathan could respond, the conference room door opened, and a woman in her 30s stepped in. Her expression hesitant but determined. Emily recognized her instantly. Lila Bennett, one of their early hires at Apex, someone who'd been in the room when Nathan accused her of fraud. Lila's eyes met Emily's, and there was something there, guilt, maybe, or resolve. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Lila said, her voice shaking slightly, "but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Emily's telling the truth. I saw the original code, her code, in the early builds. Nathan had me rewrite the commit logs to remove her name after she left." The room erupted in silence, the kind that feels like a vacuum sucking the air out of everything. Nathan's face was a mask of fury now, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Lila, you're mistaken," he said, his voice dangerously low. You're risking your career over a misunderstanding." Lila shook her head, stepping closer to Emily. "No, Nathan. I've kept quiet too long. I saw what you did to her, how you turned everyone against her. I have backups too, emails, meeting notes, all of it." Emily's throat tightened, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over her. She'd thought she was alone in this fight, but Lila's courage was a lifeline she hadn't expected. Ethan stood his presence commanding the room. "Nathan, this merger is built on lies," he said, his voice like ice. "You tried to sell me stolen intellectual property, and you thought you could get away with it. My legal team's already reviewing Dr. Harper's evidence, and now we have a second witness. I suggest you start explaining." Nathan's eyes darted between Ethan, Emily, and Lila, his composure unraveling like a frayed thread. "This is a setup," he spat, standing now, his hands slamming on the table. "You think you can walk in here with some forged documents and a disgruntled ex-employee and ruin me? I've got lawyers, Marcus. The best in the country. You're making a mistake." Ethan's smile was cold, predatory. "No, Nathan. You made the mistake when you thought you could erase someone like Emily Harper and not face consequences. This meeting's over. My team will be in touch with your board and the authorities." Nathan's face twisted, and for a moment Emily thought he might lash out. But he just stood there, breathing heavily, his empire crumbling around him. "Emily," he said, turning to her, his voice low and venomous. "You think this is over? I know where you live. I've had people watching you for months. You can't hide from me." The threat sent a chill down her spine. But Emily held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said, her voice steady. "You took everything from me once, Nathan. You don't get to do it again." As Ethan guided her out of the conference room, his hand firm on her arm, Emily felt a strange mix of triumph and terror. Lila followed her presence, a quiet reassurance that Emily wasn't alone. The elevator ride down was silent, but Ethan's grip on her hand was a lifeline grounding her as her mind raced. Nathan's threat echoed in her head. He'd been watching her, tracking her even in her carefully constructed anonymity. "He's bluffing," Ethan said, as they stepped into the lobby, his voice low, but certain. "He's desperate, and desperate people make empty threats." Emily shook her head, her heart still racing. "You don't know him like I do. Nathan doesn't bluff. If he says he's been watching me, he means it." Lila spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "He's right, Mr. Caldwell. Nathan's obsessive. When Emily left, he spent weeks making sure no one in the industry would hire her. He's not going to let this go." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with anger. "He won't have a choice. I've got security on speed dial and my lawyers are already drafting a restraining order. Emily, you're safe with me." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the strength in his voice. But Nathan's words had reopened old wounds, reminding her how easily he could destroy her life. As they stepped out into the Seattle rain, Emily felt the weight of her victory tempered by the fear of what Nathan might do next. But for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground with Ethan and Lila by her side, and that felt like a start. 1 year later, the Seattle skyline glittered against the twilight, a mosaic of lights reflecting off the Puget Sound. As Emily Harper stood in the sleek office of Harper Innovations, her own company perched on the 20th floor of a downtown tower. The space was a far cry from the cramped Queen's apartment where she'd hidden 2 years ago, its open-plan design buzzing with the energy of her small but dedicated team, their monitors glowing with lines of code that bore her name. Emily's reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a woman she barely recognized, confident, purposeful, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her navy dress tailored to fit her new life. Harper Innovations had launched 6 months ago, built on the reclaimed patents of her AI algorithms, and already it was making waves securing contracts with major firms and drawing interest from investors across the country. The headline on her desk, a copy of the Seattle Times, still made her heart skip. Apex Innovations founder. Sentence to 7 years for intellectual property theft. Nathan Brooks was gone. His empire dismantled his lies, exposed in a courtroom where Emily's evidence, her code, her emails, her relentless truth had sealed his fate. But even now, standing in her own office surrounded by proof of her triumph, Emily felt the ghost of his threat lingering, a shadow that no headline could erase. She shook it off, turning to the window to watch the city come alive. Its pulse, a reminder that she was no longer hiding. She was rebuilding not just her career, but herself. And she wasn't doing it alone. The elevator chimed, and Ethan Caldwell stepped out, his presence as commanding as ever in a tailored blazer and jeans. A smile playing on his lips as he spotted her. "Caught you working late again?" he teased, crossing the room to press a kiss to her forehead. His touch was warm, grounding a constant in the whirlwind of the past year. Emily leaned into him, savoring the way his arms felt like home. "Someone has to keep the lights on," she said, her voice light, but carrying the weight of everything they'd been through. A year ago, she'd stood in Nathan's conference room facing her past with a courage she didn't know she had, bolstered by Ethan's unwavering belief in her. Since then, they'd fought together through depositions, court hearings, and the relentless media scrutiny that followed Nathan's downfall. Ethan had been her rock, his resources and resolve, turning her evidence into a weapon that brought Apex to its knees. But it was more than that. He'd seen her not as the broken woman Nathan had left behind, but as the brilliant, resilient person she was becoming. And somewhere between late-night strategy sessions and quiet moments by the lake, they'd fallen in love, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. Something Emily had thought she'd never find again. "You ready for tomorrow?" Ethan asked, pulling back to look at her, his hazel eyes searching. Tomorrow was the Pacific Northwest Tech Summit, where Emily was slated to give a keynote address, her first public appearance since the trial. She'd spent weeks preparing not just the speech, but herself, steeling her nerves to tell her story to a room full of strangers, how she'd built Sentinel, how Nathan had stolen it, how she'd fought back and won. The thought made her stomach twist, but not with fear, anticipation maybe, or the thrill of finally owning her narrative. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. "Though I'm still not sure how I feel about being a poster child for overcoming adversity." Ethan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You're not a poster child. You're a trailblazer. Half the people in that room will be there to hear how you took down Nathan Brooks. The other half will be begging you to let them invest in Harper Innovations." Emily rolled her eyes, but his confidence was infectious. She'd spent so long doubting herself, letting Nathan's lies define her, that Ethan's belief in her felt like a gift. "Speaking of investments," she said, turning to her desk to grab a folder, "we got an offer from Horizon Ventures today. $10 million for a 15% stake." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "That's the third offer this month. You're going to have to start turning people away." Emily grinned, a spark of pride igniting in her chest. "Or maybe I'll just keep building until they're fighting over crumbs." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the glass door. Lila Bennett stepped in, her expression a mix of nerves and excitement. Lila, who'd risked her career to back Emily in that fateful meeting, was now her lead developer, her quiet strength a cornerstone of Harper Innovations. "Sorry to interrupt," Lila said, holding up a tablet, "but I thought you'd want to see this." One of our old Apex colleagues just emailed me. He wants to meet, says he owes you an apology. Emily's breath caught. She'd spent the last year rebuilding bridges with the few colleagues who'd believed her, but many had stayed silent, complicit in Nathan's lies. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "Mark Reynolds," Lila said. "He was in the room when Nathan, you know. He says he feels terrible for not speaking up sooner." Emily's mind flashed to that day Mark's averted eyes as Nathan accused her of fraud. She'd hated him for his silence, but now, standing in her own office, she felt a flicker of compassion. "Tell him I'll meet him," she said, "but not to apologize, to talk about what's next." Lila nodded, a small smile breaking through. "You're kinder than I would be." Emily shrugged. "Holding grudges doesn't build anything. I'd rather move forward." That night, Ethan drove her to his house on Bainbridge Island, a modern cedar and glass retreat nestled against the shore, its windows glowing against the darkening sky. They'd spent countless evenings here, planning Harper innovations, laughing over takeout, or just sitting in silence watching the waves. Tonight, though, felt different, charged with a quiet intensity Emily couldn't quite place. Ethan led her to the deck, where the air was crisp with salt and pine, the sound of the tide a gentle rhythm. He handed her a glass of wine, his fingers lingering on hers. "You've been quiet all evening," he said, his voice soft but probing. Nervous about the speech, Emily sipped her wine. The rich notes grounding her a little, she admitted. "It's not just about telling my story. It's about standing in front of all those people and saying, 'This is who I am.' I haven't done that since before." Ethan's hand found hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You've been that person all along," he said. "The woman who built an AI that changed an industry, who faced down a liar, and one who's building something even bigger now. Tomorrow, you're just letting the world see her." His words hit her like a wave washing away the last vestiges of doubt. She'd spent so long hiding, letting Nathan's betrayal define her, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be proud of who she was. Ethan set his glass down, his expression shifting to something almost nervous, a rarity for a man who commanded boardrooms with ease. "There's something I've been wanting to do," he said, reaching into his pocket. Emily's heart skipped as he pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that held promises bigger than words. He dropped to one knee, right there on the deck, the sea stretching out behind him like an endless possibility. "Emily Harper," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "You walked into my life a year ago and turned it upside down. You showed me what real strength looks like. Not power, not money, but the courage to rebuild after everything's been taken from you. You made me want to be better, to fight for what's right, to believe in something bigger than myself." He opened the box, revealing a ring, a simple emerald-cut diamond that caught the moonlight, elegant and unpretentious, just like her. "I love your mind, your heart, your resilience. I love the way you sign with my mother, the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, the way you never give up, even when you're scared. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, building something real, something lasting. Emily, will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from a joy so fierce it overwhelmed her. She'd thought trust was dead, buried under Nathan's lies, but Ethan had brought it back piece by piece with every moment he'd stood by her. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Ethan, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands steady where hers were shaking, and pulled her into a kiss that felt like a promise, warm and deep and full of hope. The next day at the tech summit, Emily stood backstage, her heart pounding as she watched the crowd through a crack in the curtain. Hundreds of people filled the auditorium, CEOs, developers, investors, all waiting to hear her speak. Her dress, a deep green that matched her ring, felt like armor, and the weight of Ethan's hand on hers, just before she'd left for the stage, was a reminder that she wasn't alone. When her name was called, she stepped into the spotlight, her voice steady as she began. 2 years ago, I was erased, she said, her words carrying across the room. My work, my reputation, my future, stolen by someone I trusted. But today, I'm here to tell you that endings are just beginnings in disguise. I built an AI called Sentinel, and when it was taken from me, I thought I'd lost everything. But I learned that real strength isn't in what you create, it's in what you do when it's taken away. The crowd was silent, hanging on her words as she told her story. The late nights coding Nathan's betrayal, the fight to reclaim her work. She spoke of Lila's courage, Ethan's belief in her, and the company she'd built from the ashes. Harper Innovations isn't just about technology, she said, her voice gaining strength. It's about trust in yourself, in the people who stand by you, in the truth that no one can take away if you're brave enough to fight for it. The applause was deafening, but Emily's eyes found Ethan in the front row, his smile a beacon in the sea of faces. After the speech, as she mingled with attendees, Mark Reynolds approached, his face lined with regret. "Emily, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice low. "I should have spoken up back then. I believed Nathan because it was easier, and I've hated myself for it ever since." Emily looked at him, seeing not the colleague who'd betrayed her, but a man trying to make amends. "Thank you, Mark," she said, "but don't apologize. Help me build something better. We're hiring." His eyes widened, then softened with gratitude. "I'd like that," he said. Later, at a quiet dinner with Ethan and Margaret, Emily signed her thanks to Margaret for her warmth that first night at Starlight Brew. Margaret's hands moved quickly, her smile mischievous. "I knew you were special," she signed, "and I told Ethan he'd be a fool to let you go." Emily laughed, her heart full, as she looked at Ethan, who was watching her with a love so clear it took her breath away. They'd started a scholarship fund for women in tech, a way to give others the chance she'd almost lost. And Emily felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by a future she could shape. As they left the restaurant, walking hand in hand through Seattle's rain-slicked streets, Emily thought about the woman she'd been scared diminished, running from a past that no longer defined her. Trust, she'd learned, wasn't about never being hurt. It was about choosing to believe in the people who saw you, who fought for you, who reminded you of your own strength. With Ethan by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next, not as a victim, but as a woman who'd turned her pain into power. The city hummed around them, alive with possibility, and Emily Harper knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.